White cops framed a black woman, bribed a judge, but they never expected who she really was. The courtroom was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of the judge's gavel against the mahogany desk. All eyes were on the black woman standing at the defendant's table, her posture upright, her face unreadable. She had been accused of crimes so heinous they sent whispers rippling through the gallery. The evidence was damning, the witnesses confident, and the verdict seemingly inevitable. But as the judge leaned forward ready to pronounce her fate, the woman finally spoke. "But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below." "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but charged with an unshakable resolve. "Before you decide my future, you should know that you've already decided my past." The judge froze. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but it was already too late. Naomi Grant had spent her childhood in the shadow of an injustice that had shattered her family. Her father, a devoted community activist in their small southern town, had been arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. The evidence had been fabricated, and the judge, Arthur Malone, had turned a blind eye, pocketing bribes to ensure the convictions stuck. Naomi's father died in prison 5 years later, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. From that day on, Naomi vowed to fight the system that had destroyed her family. She studied law, strategy, and investigative techniques, building a quiet but formidable reputation as a legal analyst. But her real plan was never about climbing the corporate ladder. It was about justice, or vengeance, depending on who you asked. The plan began to take shape when Naomi uncovered a pattern of corruption involving 2 white police officers, Mark Callahan and James Tennyson. They had built careers framing innocent black residents, padding their arrest records, and splitting the bribes from judges willing to convict without question. Judge Malone was their trusted ally. Naomi knew exposing them outright wouldn't be enough. These men had spent years covering their tracks. She needed to force their hand, to make them believe they had the upper hand. So Naomi set a trap. She orchestrated her own arrest, planting herself in the path of Callahan and Tennyson during a routine patrol. She made sure she fit the description of a fictitious suspect involved in a high-profile robbery. Predictably, the officers arrested her without evidence, claiming they had eyewitness testimony and fabricated video footage. Naomi sat quietly in the interrogation room as they built their case against her, knowing they were digging their own graves. "She's done for," Callahan whispered to Tennyson outside the room. "Malone will handle it like always." The trial was swift and meticulously staged. The prosecution presented fake witnesses, doctored footage, and forged documents. Naomi, representing herself, appeared calm but oddly uninvested in her own defense. It was exactly what the officers and the judge expected, another powerless victim crushed by the weight of their corruption. But as the trial drew to a close, Naomi began to turn the tide. During cross-examination, she started asking pointed questions about the chain of custody for the evidence, subtly leading the jury to doubt its authenticity. She introduced her own evidence, carefully collected over months, that hinted at a larger conspiracy without revealing her hand too early. Judge Malone grew visibly uncomfortable. He interrupted Naomi several times, trying to limit her line of questioning, but she persisted. On the final day of the trial, Naomi delivered her closing argument. She began by addressing the jury, but soon turned her attention to Judge Malone. "You've seen this play out before, haven't you, Your Honor?" she asked, her tone deceptively light. Malone frowned. "Miss Grant, I suggest you focus on the case at hand." "Oh, I am," Naomi said, stepping closer to the bench, "because this case is about more than just me. It's about a pattern, a system, and those who profit from it. People like these officers," she pointed to Callahan and Tennyson, who shifted uncomfortably, "and people like you." The courtroom erupted in gasps. "What are you implying?" Malone barked, his voice shaky. "I'm not implying anything," Naomi said, her calm demeanor unshaken. "I'm stating a fact. You framed my father just like you're trying to frame me." The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Naomi presented documents she had secretly obtained, linking Malone, Callahan, and Tennyson to decades of corruption. Bank transfers, emails, and even recorded conversations painted a damning picture. But Naomi wasn't done. She had one last card to play. "I didn't just come here to clear my name," she said, turning to face the jury. "I came here to make sure this ends." At that moment, federal agents entered the courtroom, armed with arrest warrants for the judge and both officers. Naomi had been working with the FBI for months, providing them with the evidence they needed to take down the entire operation. Malone's face turned ashen as the agents cuffed him. Callahan and Tennyson protested, but their voices were drowned out by the applause that erupted from the gallery. Naomi stood tall, finally free, not just from the false charges, but from the weight of her family's past. As she walked out of the courtroom, a reporter rushed up to her. "Miss Grant, how does it feel to bring down the people who wronged you?" Naomi paused, a faint smile on her lips. "It feels like justice." But in her heart, she knew it was more than that. It was the beginning of a reckoning. As the reporters swarmed Naomi outside the courthouse, microphones thrust in her face, she answered only a few questions before slipping into a waiting car. The driver was an older man, his features sharp and weathered. "Did it go as planned?" he asked, his voice low. Naomi nodded. "Better than I expected, Marcus. But this isn't over." Marcus, a retired investigator who had worked with Naomi in secret, gave a grim smile. "I figured. People like Malone don't operate alone. This corruption runs deeper than we've uncovered so far." Naomi glanced out the window, her mind racing. The takedown of Malone and the officers had been a victory, but it had revealed something far more sinister. A network of judges, law enforcement, and local officials who had turned justice into a commodity. Her father's case wasn't an anomaly. It was a blueprint. That night, Naomi sat in her modest apartment, the walls covered with timelines, photos, and red strings connecting names and events. Malone had been a central figure, but there were others, higher up and more insulated from exposure. Her laptop buzzed with an encrypted message from an anonymous source. "Judge Malone is just the tip of the iceberg. Look into the Rutherford Foundation. They fund more than scholarships." Naomi's eyes narrowed. The Rutherford Foundation was a respected philanthropic organization known for funding judicial reform initiatives. If they were involved, it would explain how the corruption had remained hidden for so long. The next morning, Naomi visited Marcus at his small, cluttered office. He was already at work, sifting through decades-old case files. "Rutherford Foundation," Naomi said, dropping the name like a bomb. Marcus froze mid-page turn. "You're kidding. They're untouchable. Their board is stacked with senators and CEOs. "Exactly," Naomi replied. "Which means if they're involved, this conspiracy is nationwide." Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just about clearing your father's name anymore, is it?" Naomi shook her head. "It never was. This is about stopping them for good." Her investigation led her to a gala hosted by the Rutherford Foundation, an annual event where the city's elite gathered to discuss progress and justice. Naomi, dressed in a sleek black gown, blended seamlessly with the crowd. Her target that evening was Leonard Rutherford III, the foundation's chairman and a man known for his charm and philanthropic efforts. As Naomi approached him, she extended a hand. "Mr. Rutherford, it's an honor to meet you," she said, her voice smooth. "I'm Naomi Grant. I've heard so much about your work." Rutherford smiled warmly, his eyes scanning her face. "Miss Grant, the honor is mine. And please, call me Leonard." They exchanged pleasantries, but Naomi's sharp mind was focused on reading between the lines of his words, analyzing his body language. When she brought up Judge Malone's recent arrest, Rutherford's smile faltered for a split second before he recovered. "What a tragedy for the judicial system," he said, shaking his head. "We must hold ourselves to higher standards." Naomi smiled politely, but her instincts screamed that he was lying. After the gala, Naomi slipped into Rutherford's private office, bypassing the locks with tools Marcus had provided. Inside, she found files detailing massive donations to certain judges and law enforcement agencies, often disguised as grants. One name stood out among the transactions: Charles Worthington, A federal judge with a spotless public record. "Got you," Naomi whispered, snapping photos of the documents. As she prepared to leave, the office door creaked open. "I had a feeling about you," a voice said. Naomi turned to see Leonard Rutherford standing there, his calm demeanor replaced by cold menace. "You're smarter than the others," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "But do you really think you can bring us down? We own this system." Naomi met his gaze, unflinching. "You owned it. Not anymore." Before Rutherford could respond, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Naomi had alerted federal agents to her location, ensuring the evidence she uncovered would be seized immediately. Rutherford was arrested, and the media frenzy was explosive. Naomi's name became synonymous with justice, her story inspiring countless others to fight corruption. But she knew the battle wasn't over. Sitting in Marcus's office days later, she spread out the files she had taken from Rutherford's office. "This is just one branch of the tree," she said. "We've cut it down, but the roots are still there." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "Then we keep digging." Naomi leaned back, determination burning in her eyes. For her father, for her community, and for everyone who had been silenced by the system, she wouldn't stop until every piece of the network was exposed. And this time, they wouldn't see her coming.